glad you're here. We've been revisiting this nativity story over the course of the last couple of weeks, and we've seen that people letting go of something so they can draw close to God, get close to the presence of God by letting go. And the journey towards seeking and knowing Jesus begins with a decision to let go. Decision to let go. For this Christmas Eve morning service, I want to suggest the idea that we need to let go of random. We need to let go of, quote, the idea of random. Here in front of me, I have a box, and it says random. I know some of you you put your Christmas trees up, and here we have at the church 2 Christmas trees. They're beautiful. The decoration team did an exceptionally good job. And in there you have these ornaments, and they all fit real good together. I mean, they did a really good job. Every one of them has this place. It looks beautiful, and they're not random at all. As a matter of fact, random would be taking one of these and then trying to figure out where these random ornaments would fit. And let's for a moment go in our imagination and see it as the tree and its ornaments representing life events. And a lot of life events that happen in our life events, have a place in the purpose tree. Let's call it a purpose tree. And we may even use words like, oh, when I met my wife, that was a God thing. Oh, that would be an ornament, right? Oh, when I had little Johnny, that was a God thing. Oh, when little Johnny left, that was a God thing, right? Everything has its place. Everything has a uniquely, designed area for something, a life event that makes sense to us, that we can say, God was working in that event. How many have those kind of events? Any of y'all have those kind of events where you're like, God was working in those events? Yeah, most of you do. Yeah, where you're like, man, I saw God work in my marriage. I saw God work in the one decision I needed to make. I saw God work in a very powerful way. We all have those stories. And those stories make it into the tree. Those ornaments, right, make it into the tree, the purpose tree. Because we see the purpose. We look back, we're like, that's what God was trying to do with that. But then there's certain life events where they just seem random. And we don't know quite where to put these events yet because we're not quite sure what they mean. We're trying to draw purpose and meaning, but we're not quite sure what that meaning or purpose is. And they're just random. It's the unexpected death in the family. Boy, that's random. Well, you're like, where do I fit it into the tree? What's the meaning and purpose of that? Because that was painful. But that brought me to my knees in tears and begging God for an answer. What do you do with the ornament random called broke, debt? And that happened yesterday as you were rushing to H-E-B and Walmart. You're like, I'm broke now. But where does that even fit? You're like, I just can barely make it. I don't make a lot, and what I do make, I try and budget it, but boy, it's just disappearing very quickly, and it's somewhat random, especially during the season, and you don't know quite where to put it because you don't know quite what the meaning and purpose of that debt crisis is in your life. Or for some of you, you got hit with some paperwork. And it's a divorce. And you didn't see it coming. Oh, if you would have known that he was cheating or she was cheating or that she wanted out or he wanted out. But now you're coming here this morning and you're like, what do I do with that? What's the meaning of that and purpose of that? Why would God allow that? And maybe you have trouble placing it. You're not quite sure where you would put that in the purpose tree because everything fits very perfectly now. For some of you came in here this morning, and it was depression. It just hit you like a ton of bricks. Not quite sure why. All of a sudden, you just felt really depressed, and you've been feeling depressed for a while. And you're begging God at night as your tears are flowing, God, what's the purpose? What's the meaning? Why do I have to go through this? And you're trying to figure out, where does it fit in the purpose tree? You're not quite sure where it fits in. Some of you have had chronic illness. You're trying to figure out what is the meaning of that, and doctors are confused, and you're not quite sure what exactly is going on. And you're like, man, everything is fitting just perfectly, but that random, quote, random thing that has happened to you at a young age, or maybe you're older now, and you're like, what do I do with that? And there's so many others that you came in here maybe with, like chronic anxiety, and maybe it was you got laid off. Merry Christmas, your boss said. Maybe you got betrayed. You trusted someone, and a knife came, and you were betrayed. Or maybe you're going through a breakup. Like, but we loved each other. And she said, don't love you anymore. Breaking up, buddy. Like, but I brushed my teeth and I blew my deodorant. You don't know quite where to put it. What's the meaning and purpose of that pain? And for some of you, maybe it's loneliness. Oh, this is a beast. For many of you, you've been struggling with this for a long, long, long time. You're exhausted. You're doing a lot of work. You're going in all cylinders. I mean, you're working hard, and yet you're the loneliest you've ever been, and you feel it. And there may be a crowd around you. You may have had some people, guests, over at your house during the season, and yet all the while people were laughing, and everybody was there, and there was still deep in your gut this sense of loneliness. Where do you fit it? Because you might be like, God, what's the purpose of that? Is there a purpose for that? I want to suggest to you this morning that there is a purpose and there is meaning in all that. Humans have an insatiable desire to find meaning and purpose in even the most random events in life. We long for the big picture, the history of our life. We long that maybe somehow, like somebody knows the narrative, somebody knows the meta-narrative, like what is going on in our lives, so that we ask, it fits in, right? We all long for that. Why things happen the way they happen, why random happens to you, and we cling to that, especially as followers of Christ. And why do we do that? It's because it gives us at least a measure of purpose to everything. That there's a story that's going somewhere. There's somewhere that this got to be meaningful and purposeful. That it's got to be a meaning and a purpose for the tragedy that happened. And we as Christ followers will put it this way. And you might want to finish it with me. Everything happens for what? For a reason. We share that cliche, right? I don't believe in what? Coincidences. We say that to each other. I don't believe in coincidences. I know I got the prime parking spot. God, I must have favor with God. I don't believe in coincidences. Or we say, you just haven't met the what? The right person yet. Well, thank you, Bubba. That really encourages me if you're in that boat, right? Or how about this one? I guess it wasn't what? Meant to be. See, all those little cliches that we share with one another are cliches that are deeply rooted in an idea, whether we realize it or not, that there is some purpose even to randomness. That there is some meaning even in the most random events that are tragic in our lives. Christians connect the dots and call it a God thing. When tragedy strikes, we ask why. We want to find purpose in the pain. We want suffering to connect to something that's purposeful. We naturally assume that there is purpose as Christ followers. And the Christmas story is a reminder that that thing in us that desires to make order out of the disorder, it reminds us that there are times where God connects the dots, where they're evident to us. That the world isn't random as we think it is, that there is a story that's playing out in our lives, that one day God will show us why the things that happen to us, even the most tragic, painful things in our lives. That life is somehow connected, that there is a divine story. And from time to time, not always, but from time to time, it is as if though God drops directly into people's lives in unmistakable ways to give the flywheel a push, to remind, to reorient, to connect the dots. That's the case with the nativity scene, the nativity story. It is that moment in time where we see God connecting the dots where it's not random or doesn't feel or look random. So the thing about random life events is what we're going to look at. I want you to go to Luke chapter 1, verse 1. If you brought your Bible, go to Luke chapter 1, verse 1. If you have your YouVersion Bible, which is the app you can download, just go to Luke chapter 1, verse 1. I'm going to suggest the New Living Translation or the NIV if you're doing the app. And it reads like this. It says, many people have set out to write accounts about the events that have been fulfilled among us. This is Luke talking about it, and he's a former doctor, and he's talking about just really getting eyewitness accounts of what Jesus did and what he said and all these things. He's asking several people that were right there at the scene with Jesus that heard the stories. They used the eyewitness reports circulating among us from the early disciples. Having carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I also have decided to write an accurate account for you, most honorable Theophilus. Verse 4, so you can be certain of the truth of everything you were taught. And so the gospel writer is saying, hey, listen, this is not what I saw because Luke didn't see it. He wasn't in the mix, at least not frequently. So he's asking people, what happened? What did you see? What did you hear? You know that our faith is rooted in an event? And as good as, the Bible tells me, that, therefore I believe it, and that's true of me, but that's not where my faith is rooted. My faith is rooted in the fact that there's eyewitness accounts that were interviewed, and historians that were not believers that attest to the fact that Jesus not only was born, but resurrected from the dead. And certainly here, Luke is alluding to that, the fact that this is not just hearsay. This is not the way typical stories start, because it's not a story. It's the historical account of Jesus. And in verse 26, I want you to fast forward. This is an account of Mary. We're going to revisit Mary and look at it from a different angle this morning. And in verse 26, it says, in the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a village in Galilee, to a virgin named Mary. She was engaged to be married to a man named Joseph, a descendant of King David. Now, not much is known about Mary at this point, or even Joseph and their background. All we know is that they were engaged. Their purpose is that they're going to get married, and that's where they're headed, a life where she marries a carpenter. And she would probably have lived and died in the same Galilean community she grew up in, if it were not for God showing up. If God wouldn't have shown up in her life, maybe perhaps she would have been wondering, what are these random events? But the time had come in human history for God to send his son, Emmanuel, God with us, God in the flesh. In verse 28, it says, Gabriel appeared to her and said, greetings, favorite woman, the Lord is with you. Confused and disturbed? You and I would have been confused and disturbed too. You wake up, boom, there's an angel in front of you. Verse 29, confused and disturbed, Mary tried to think what the angel could mean. Don't be afraid, Mary, the angel told her, for you have found favor with God. In other words, you have been singled out for a purpose. What's about to happen to you, what I'm about to tell you, in other words, it's not random. It's not, where do I place it in the purpose tree? I'm about to give you a lot of clarity in this. Verse 31, I want you to notice the word will and how many times it shows up. The angel talking to Mary says, you will conceive and give birth to a son. That's not random. That's purpose. And you will name him Jesus. He will, not might, but he will be very great and will be called the Son of the Most High. The Lord God will give him the throne of his ancestor David. and he will reign over Israel forever. His kingdom, what? Will never end. 7 times. Folks, that's not random. That's not the random ornament. That's God coming to time and space in the very moment here in history and saying, these things will happen. There's no random, there's purpose. But the kingdom part. Certainly she would have been like, kingdom? We haven't had a kingdom in 500 years. But she wasn't really concerned about that. She had another issue to contend with. And we see that in verse 34. Mary asked the angel, but how, in some translations, how will this happen? Number 8. I am a virgin. The angel replied, the Holy Spirit will, number 9, come up upon you, or come upon you. And the power of the Most High will overshadow you. So the baby to be born will be holy, and he will be called the Son of God. What's more, your relative Elizabeth has become pregnant in her old age. People used to say she was barren, but she has conceived a son and is now in the 6th month. For the word of God, what? Will never fail. 13 times. Look at 13. Will never fail. It had been 400 years since God had said a word, since he had spoken to a prophet, since something had been penned down. It was the silent years, 400 years of it. During that time, the Babylonians came about, or even before that, Babylonians, the Persians, Alexander the Great, the Roman Republic, now the empire. Now this, the birth of the king, God, it would have been like, where have you been? Because we've had a lot of random happen. We're beginning to wonder. So here's the thing about random life events. The first one is this. On occasion, God dropped directly into the lives of men and women to push the momentum of his plan, to push the flywheel of his plan. It's like God showed up in history and said, no. Don't you understand? This isn't about the plans of man. This is about the will of God. Every one of those kingdoms and empires came and went by God's declaration. They came and they went. And when you look at the details and the history, you may not see God's hand, but understand that life is not random. He is the God of purpose, and everything happens because of his will. Everything happens because of his will. Which leads me to the second thing about random, which is, but for the most part, our days seem to be made up of mostly random events. Wouldn't you say? From our vantage point, it's like, well, boy, that was random. Mary doesn't hear from the angel again. Things get back to random, only worse. Next thing she knows is she's pregnant and riding a donkey from Nazareth to Bethlehem, about 80-mile journey, which is a very hard journey by foot. She's wondering, well, where's the angel now, probably, you know? The misfavored of God gets there, and the journey had been so long, by the time she gets there, there's no room anymore. Has to go to a stable. Then they hear that Herod wants to kill their child. So they get back on a donkey and head to Egypt, which is about 200 miles further away from home. Boy, that's random. Then Mary gets the worst news imaginable. Herod did what Herod does. He slaughtered every boy 2 years and under in Bethlehem and the surrounding vicinity. How could she, I would imagine, not feel guilty or at fault for the death of so many 2-year-old and under boys? A random act of violence, another day for Herod. That's what that was. So on which branch of the purpose tree was Mary supposed to hang all that randomness? Where does she hang it in the purpose tree? And this is the reality, that one day, favorite of God Mary would listen as her God-given son is beaten within an inch of his life, mocked, and crucified. We know the end of the story, but she didn't know the end of the story. In that moment, it was just another senseless Roman execution. From everyone's perspective, in that very moment, it was another random act of violence. Another character in the story. One broken-hearted Galilean mother. Random. Where do you put it? But from the vantage point of God and time, we know there was nothing random about it. No randomness about any of it. Her pain was our gain. This is what perfect faith is. Well, what is not. Perfect faith is not faith that moves God. Perfect faith is not faith that moves God. Perfect faith is faith that moves us to trust God when he doesn't seem to be moving. Let me say that again for those of you who are putting it on Facebook or Snapchat, on Twitter world, whatever, or X now, right? Perfect faith is faith that moves us to trust God when he doesn't seem to be moving. That is perfect faith. Let me clearly define it here if you haven't gotten the point yet. Perfect faith is to respond to the seemingly random events of life as if they are part of the perfect plan of God. Some of you needed to hear that this morning. Perfect faith is to respond to the seemingly random events of your life as if though they're part of God's perfect plan. Dare I say, for you. Paul put it in theological terms when he wrote in Ephesians chapter 1, verse 11. In him we were also chosen, having been predestined according to the plan of him who works out what? Everything in conformity with the purpose of his will. He works out everything in conformity to his will. Mary put it this way in her personal, likely tender, quivering voice. She said, I am the Lord's servant. May everything you have said about me come true. That's a woman who's saying, I'm going to trust in God's perfect plan. Even when things turn random, I'm going to trust in the perfect God. You see, we want to know where to hang everything on the tree. I want to know the order and the relationship of all these random things, but it's not our responsibility to know where it goes in the tree. It's not our responsibility to know where a random event hits. Our responsibility is to believe that everything has a place on the tree. Everything has a place on the tree. Whether we know where it goes or not. Chronic illness has a place in the tree. I don't know where it goes, but it has a place. Divorce, as painful as that is, and the betrayal being deep, has a place in the tree. The breakup, the layoff, the chronic anxiety, the debt, the betrayal, the depression, the loneliness, and the death. All of it has a place in the tree. It's not ours to determine where it fits, but it fits. Everything will fit. And one day, all of us will know where and how. Here's what I've seen. If people are able to see it all as coming from the hand of God, then they're able to respond in a way that allows God to create purpose from randomness. When you see everything in your life as from the hand of God, you're able to see clearly. And you're able to respond to God in a way that it makes sense in your life. See, we were created to look for purpose. Sometimes we find it, sometimes we don't. Sorry, that's what my 5 years of seminary, master's in theology, taught me. Sometimes you find it, sometimes you don't. Sometimes we find it immediately, sometimes we find it eventually. heaven, maybe, in the presence of God. I want to land the plane here. At Christmas, we're reminded that life is not as random as it seems. And tragedy has its place in the tree. There's a story taking place in your life, a divine story of God's work in your life. As children of God who have been set apart for His purposes. And if you choose, you can participate in that journey. And be like Mary, who said, I am the Lord's servant. May everything you have said about me come true.